At 6:18 local time, the Sea of Japan, 40 miles southwest of the Korean peninsula coast, looks exactly like international waters, which is what it is, and nothing else, which is what it will remain regardless of the position of anyone who finds international waters inconveniently located near their coastline. The sky is pre-dawn gray. The water is 4 degrees Celsius above what sailors describe as cold and 2 degrees below what they describe as very cold. Visibility is 11 nautical miles. There's a low swell from the northwest and a wind that has been coming from the same direction since yesterday evening and has no plans for tomorrow. USS Fitzgerald, hull number DDG-62, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, is making 14 knots on a standard patrol track that the 7th Fleet has been running in this area for decades. Because decades of running the same track in international waters is how you establish, with the consistency that international law both permits and protects, that the track is yours to run. On the bridge, the officer of the deck is on her second cup of coffee from a thermos that she filled at 4 o'clock, because the Sea of Japan at 6:18 in October is not a venue for complacency about caffeine logistics. The Bridge Watch section is alert. Alert is the only setting available on the 7th Fleet's Sea of Japan patrol, because the specific geography of 40 miles from the Korean peninsula coast in international waters means that what is routine can become professional interesting with a frequency that keeps the alertness from atrophying. The tactical picture is standard. 2 Japanese commercial fishing vessels to the south, a South Korean cargo ship on a transit bearing northeast, and the specific cluster of surface contacts that has been sitting at the 12 nautical mile mark on the northern bearing since 0544, which is when the watch section first acquired them and logged them and noted that they were not moving like vessels that had somewhere to be, but were moving like vessels that were waiting to see if something was going to happen. In the Combat Information Center, the Tactical Action Officer has been watching that cluster since 5:44. 14 contacts. Small. Fast when needed, currently making 6 knots in a holding pattern with the geometric discipline of vessels told to hold. His assessment, confirmed by the Intelligence Digest, Korean People's Army-Navy patrol craft, Shershen-class and Chaho-class torpedo boats out of Wonsan, 40 miles northwest. The Shershen entered Soviet service in 1960, the year routine satellite navigation was science fiction. And North Korea has maintained its fleet, since on equipment, the original manufacturer stopped supporting before most of the current crew's parents were born, individually a minor inconvenience. 14 of them at 45 knots from multiple vectors simultaneously are a sequencing problem that requires more than casual attention. He was giving them considerably more than casual attention. At 5:55, the formation had been briefed. The commanding officer had been notified at 5:47, 6 minutes before his own standing threshold for this type of contact, because the Tactical Action Officer had decided that the threshold was a minimum and the situation warranted slightly better than minimum. The commanding officer had reviewed the picture, asked 4 questions, received 4 answers, and gone back to the chart table to review the navigation picture for the next 2 hours of patrol track. He had a coffee that he had made himself, because at this hour the wardroom coffee achieves a character that the commanding officer describes in the professional language of a person who has spent considerable time at sea as assertive. In Wonsan, at the Korean People's Army-Navy base that sits on the eastern coast of North Korea, with the strategic convenience of a facility positioned to reach the Sea of Japan patrol areas in roughly the time it takes USS Fitzgerald's watch section to drink 2 cups of coffee, the formation had departed its moorings at 4:40. The mission concept was the product of a planning process that had been running for 11 days and had the confidence of a planning process conducted by people who had access to their own intelligence assessment, which described USS Fitzgerald as an American destroyer conducting aggressive provocations in DPRK claim waters, and who did not have access to certain other information that would have been relevant to the planning. The 14 boats were a mix. 8 Shershen-class torpedo boats, each displacing approximately 170 tons, each armed with 4 533-millimeter torpedo tubes that were installed when Nikita Khrushchev was still relevant to Soviet politics and have been maintained, serviced, and, in the specific sense that the word applies to systems of this vintage, persuaded to remain functional through the combined efforts of a naval engineering corps that has developed genuine expertise in the specific problem of keeping 1960s Soviet torpedo systems operational in the 21st century, which is an expertise that exists almost nowhere else on Earth and is, objectively, impressive in its own specialized way. 6 Chaho-class patrol craft, each displacing approximately 82 tons, each armed with anti-ship missiles that are the specific vintage of anti-ship missiles that makes the threat library entry for them begin with the phrase legacy system and include a note about the guidance accuracy that uses the word variable in a context where variable means something less encouraging than the word usually implies. The combined formation had a maximum speed of 45 knots in calm water. The Sea of Japan at 618 was not calm water, 1.2-meter northwest swells, and a Shershen at 45 knots in that sea state is what the crews describe as demanding. 25 knots was manageable for the full formation. The formation was making 25. This gave them approximately 8 more minutes before the watch section would log them as closing rather than holding. This meant the formation had approximately 8 more minutes of approach before it reached the distance at which USS Fitzgerald's watch section would log it as closing rather than holding. Here is the vulnerability that nobody had planned for, and that the formation commander's intelligence assessment had not captured. And that was going to matter for exactly 9 minutes beginning at 6:21. At 6:19, USS Fitzgerald's commanding officer had made a navigation decision that was entirely routine and had nothing to do with the 14 contacts to the north. The patrol track for the next 40 minutes ran through a section of the operating area where a shallow bank, logged in the chart database, surveyed by the Japanese Hydrographic Service in 2019, and noted in the Fitzgerald's pre-transit navigation brief, required the ship to hold a specific depth contour that constrained the available maneuvering corridor to approximately 8 nautical miles. Not a tight constraint. A destroyer doing 14 knots in 8 nautical miles of maneuvering room is not constrained in any meaningful operational sense. 8 nautical miles is plenty of room for a guided missile destroyer to do everything a guided missile destroyer needs to do. 8 nautical miles is considerably less comfortable when 14 small boats are approaching from the north at 25 knots across a front that the formation commander had designed to be approximately 10 nautical miles wide. The formation was wider than the maneuvering corridor. Not by much. The outer flanking boats were at approximately 9 nautical miles separation, and the bank constraint was 8 nautical miles. But the geometry was what it was. For 9 minutes, from 0621, when the formation crossed from holding to approach, to 0630, when the patrol track cleared the bank constraint and opened the full maneuvering envelope, USS Fitzgerald was operating in a corridor that was slightly narrower than the formation approaching it. 9 minutes. The commanding officer looked at the chart, looked at the tactical display, looked at the bank constraint, and did the math that the watch section had already done. Time to clear the bank. 9 minutes, sir. We can increase speed and clear in 7 if needed. What's the formation closure rate at current speeds? 25 knots from 9 nautical miles, sir. 22 minutes to engagement range at that speed. 22 minutes before the formation reached the tactical threshold. That would require a response decision. 9 minutes of bank constraint. 13 minutes of open water before the geometry forced anything. The commanding officer looked at this for 2 seconds, which was all it required. Maintain current track. Monitor the formation. What's our weapon status? SM-2 battery fully ready, sir. CIWS fully operational on both mounts. MK-45 gun crew standing by. A pause. Torpedoes are available, but assessed non-applicable to surface targets at this range and closure geometry. What's the Aegis engagement solution? The tactical action officer had been running the engagement sequence since 544. The Aegis had built individual track files on all 14 contacts, classified each by vessel type, prioritized by threat, and calculated a sequential solution that could neutralize all 14 in under 4 minutes using SM-2 and CIWS, Chaho-class missile boats first, then the Shershen by closure rate. 14 solutions, built and ranked before the formation, crossed 9 nautical miles. The commanding officer reviewed it. Good. Maintain readiness. Continue monitoring. Now, the SLQ-32 electronic warfare suite and what it was collecting from 14 small boats that had been broadcasting since they left Wonsan at 4:40. The Shershen-class torpedo boats were not quiet. They had never been designed to be quiet. They were designed in an era when Soviet naval doctrine for fast attack craft emphasized speed and numbers rather than stealth, which is a doctrine that has a certain brutal logic and a certain specific signature in the electromagnetic environment, which is the signature of 14 boats whose navigation radars, communication systems, and torpedo fire control systems were all transmitting on frequencies that the SLQ-32's threat library had entries for dating from assessments written when the boats were new. The library entries had not been updated frequently because encounters with operational Shershen-class torpedo boats in the Sea of Japan were not common, and the intelligence community had allowed the entry to age in the way that threat library entries age when the platform they describe is assessed as being in the final years of operational relevance. The entry was now being updated in real time, which is the most reliable update method available. The fire control radar on the Chaho-class missiles boats was more interesting. The specific variant of the Styx derivative anti-ship missile guidance radar fitted to the Chaho-class had an emission profile that the SLQ-32 had logged in prior encounters as a known type, but had not previously acquired at close range with all 6 boats in active emission simultaneously. Active emission simultaneously because the formation's approach procedure required the missile boats to have their fire control systems in standby active mode during the final approach phase, which meant they were transmitting, which meant the SLQ-32 was receiving, which meant the collection log was building a close-range characterization of the Styx derivative guidance radar's specific frequency allocation and pulse pattern, with the methodical enthusiasm of a system that has been pointed at a target and told to collect. Are all 6 missile boats in active emission? The electronic warfare officer asked his petty officer. Confirmed active on all 6, sir. Standby active mode. They're running their approach checklist. Signal quality? Excellent at this range, sir. We're getting the full pulse pattern. The frequency allocation is slightly different from the baseline entry. Looks like a modification to the terminal guidance band. He paused. I want the analysis team to confirm, but this looks like an updated Seeker variant. The previous entry is from 2017. Log everything. Specifically flag the frequency deviation from the 2017 baseline. Already flagged, sir. The 14 boats were running their approach procedure, which required their targeting systems to be in active emission, which required them to be transmitting their updated seeker characteristics into the SLQ-32's collection aperture at steadily improving signal quality as the range closed. The formation had been briefed to approach, demonstrate presence, and force USS Fitzgerald to alter course or depart the area. The formation was, as a secondary and entirely unintended consequence of following its own approach doctrine, providing the U.S. Navy with an updated technical profile of a missile guidance system variant that had not been characterized since 2017. The boats were doing exactly what they had been briefed to do. The SLQ-32 was doing exactly what it had been designed to do. The two activities were, from the collection perspective, complementary. The radio intercepts were a separate category of entertainment. The formation's command net was encrypted, with an architecture that U.S. and allied agencies spent the Cold War characterizing, dating from Soviet communications equipment of the same vintage as the boats themselves. The encryption was not resolved during this encounter, but the traffic analysis, transmission pattern, timing, sequence, call signs, was building a behavioral profile of the formation's command structure, how it coordinates under approach conditions in real time. There was also the matter of the uncoded communications. The formation was using its encrypted command net for tactical coordination, but the individual boats were using commercial maritime VHF for some of their internal communication. Specifically, the boat-to-boat traffic between the formation's two rearmost Shershen-class boats, which appeared to be coordinating on a mechanical issue with one boat's port engine that was limiting its ability to maintain formation speed in the current sea state. This conversation was clear voice, entirely unencrypted, and entirely audible to anyone within radio range with the standard maritime receiver. The SLQ-32 was not a standard maritime receiver, but it was happy to collect this as well. And the intercept team noted, with the professional precision of people who take operational detail seriously, that the port engine issues on the trailing Shershen appeared to be causing the boat's speed to fluctuate between 20 and 28 knots, which was affecting the formation's rear flank geometry. The trailing boat has an engine problem, the intercept team reported to the tactical action officer. What kind of engine problem? Port engine. They're discussing it in clear voice. The machinist's mate on the trailing boat is explaining the issue to the boat ahead of it, in some detail. A pause. He has opinions about the maintenance history of that specific engine that he is sharing with some feeling. The tactical action officer logged this. He logged it with the same precision he applied to everything else, because operational detail is operational detail regardless of its source, and the trailing boat's port engine history was now part of the incident record. At 6:28, 7 minutes into the 9-minute bank constraint window, the formation reached a range that triggered the watch section's standing notification protocol. The commanding officer was already watching. The tactical action officer called it anyway, because procedures exist for the moments when everyone is already watching and exists to be followed in exactly those moments. 14 contacts, assessed KPAN formation, range 4 nautical miles, course and speed unchanged. 2 minutes to bank clearance. Yes, sir. 2 minutes. The formation at 25 knots from 4 nautical miles was 11 minutes from the minimum engagement threshold. 2 minutes of bank constraint remaining. 13-minute buffer. The commanding officer finished his coffee. It was still assertive. At 6:30, USS Fitzgerald cleared the bank constraint. The maneuvering envelope opened to the full operational corridor. The commanding officer looked at the contact picture, looked at the navigation picture, and issued a course and speed change that was, In the vocabulary of surface warfare maneuvering, a statement. All ahead full. Come left 20 degrees. Full ahead on an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer produces approximately 30 knots in open water. The turn to port opened the geometry with the formation's eastern flank boats and placed USS Fitzgerald on a course that crossed the formation's front at an angle that the formation commander had not planned for, because the planning had assumed USS Fitzgerald would maintain course and speed in the constrained corridor. The Aegis system had already calculated the new engagement geometry for the updated course, not because the commanding officer was planning to engage, but because the Aegis does not distinguish between planning and readiness, and maintains both simultaneously. The formation's response was visible on the tactical display within 90 seconds. The front rank altered course to maintain intercept geometry, which required it to turn east. The eastern flank boats, now ahead of the formation's new geometry, had to slow or turn south to avoid overlapping with the front rank. The western flank boats, now exposed to USS Fitzgerald's new course, were farther away than their formation position had planned for. In the space of 90 seconds, a formation that had been positioned with deliberate geometric discipline was dealing with the specific problem that arises when the target does not follow the geometry the formation was built to exploit. The command net traffic increased sharply. The encrypted traffic increased sharply. The clear voice traffic from the trailing boat, whose port engine was still providing approximately 22 knots, increased sharply and became somewhat more heated in character. The intercept team logged all of it. At 30 knots, USS Fitzgerald was making more speed than any boat in the formation, and the formation's eastern and western flanks were now geometrically disadvantaged relative to the new course. Not neutralized, the formation still had options, and the formation commander was using them, as evidenced by the command net traffic that the SLQ-32 was collecting, but repositioned. At 6:41, the lead formation element began a course change that opened its bearing from USS Fitzgerald's track. Not a withdrawal, a repositioning, a recognition that the geometry had changed and the approach required adjustment. The adjustment was logged. The repositioning was logged. The entire command net traffic sequence that covered the 63 seconds between USS Fitzgerald's course change and the formation's first repositioning response was logged, giving the behavioral analysis of the formation's command structure under pressure a data point of exceptional clarity. From the trigger event to the first adaptation, 63 seconds, which was now a known quantity where before it had been an estimate. On the weather deck, the forward lookout had been watching the formation through binoculars since 6:21. The boats were visible at this range in the morning light, low, fast-looking shapes on the gray water, moving with the choppy progress of small craft in a northwest swell. He had logged the types, the approximate count, the formation geometry. At 6:30, when USS Fitzgerald went to full ahead and turned, he had braced against the railing as the destroyer accelerated and turned with the unhurried authority of 9,200 tons of U.S. Navy destroyer doing what the engine plant supports. He had watched the formation begin to reposition. He had noted the trailing boat's slightly ragged station keeping, consistent with the port engine report from the intercept team, though he was not aware of that report. He noted it because it was observable, and his job was to observe. He submitted his lookout log at 7 o'clock when his rotation ended. The log was incorporated into the incident report. It agreed with the SLQ-32 picture on every point of overlap. The formation continued to reposition over the next 22 minutes. By 7:15, it had moved to a paralleling track approximately 6 nautical miles to the north of USS Fitzgerald's course, maintaining pace but no longer in approach geometry. Whether this constituted a decision to abandon the intercept objective or a decision to reposition for a second attempt was unclear from the tactical picture alone. The command net traffic had returned to its baseline rate. The Styx derivative fire control radars had returned to standby mode. The trailing boat's port engine conversation had concluded, apparently with some resolution, because its speed had stabilized at 23 knots. At 7:22, the formation turned northwest, Wonsan bearing. The approach speed they had used on the way out, 25 knots, was their return speed, which placed them back at their moorings in approximately 1 hour and 40 minutes, which would be approximately 9 o'clock local time, which was, considering that they had departed at 4:40, a 5-hour operation that would be described in the mission report as a sovereignty demonstration in Korean waters, and that would appear in the Korean Central News Agency's daily output in whatever form the media team decided best served the narrative. The collection package from the operation was the most comprehensive KPAN close approach package assembled since the command had last encountered this formation in a significantly different operational context 3 years ago, and the 3-year-old package had not included active emission from all 6 missile boats simultaneously, had not included the Styx derivative seeker frequency deviation from the 2017 baseline, and had not included any command net traffic from the approach phase because the previous encounter had not reached this range. The updated seeker characterization alone, the frequency deviation in the terminal guidance band that the electronic warfare officer had flagged during the collection, was the specific data point that the Pacific Fleet threat library entry for this missile variant had been missing, and missing in the way that a threat library entry is uncomfortable to have incomplete, which is specifically full collection package, packaged and ready to transmit, the electronic warfare officer reported at 7:35. Forward to 7th Fleet and Pacific Fleet. Flag the seeker characterization as priority. Already flagged, sir. Transmitting now. The commanding officer noted the time. He had a command chronology to write, an incident report to file, and a navigation brief to review for the next 4 hours of patrol track. The incident report would run 8 pages. The intelligence annex would be 5 pages, including the seeker characterization, the behavioral analysis of the 63-second command response window, the trailing boat engine status log from the intercept team, and a recommendation that the Pacific Fleet Threat Library entry for the Styx derivative be updated from the 2017 baseline with priority notation, because the frequency deviation was sufficiently significant to change the jamming parameters that a surface ship's electronic countermeasures should apply in a follow-on encounter. The Korean Central News Agency published a statement at 1300. The Korean People's Army Navy had conducted a successful sovereignty protection exercise, demonstrating the DPRK Navy's capability to challenge and drive away imperialist provocateurs. USS Fitzgerald had fled. The KCNA always describes adversary encounters with some variant of fled, 70 years of consistent vocabulary. Vivid, consistent. Not in the specific detail of USS Fitzgerald's course and speed at the moment of its turn, accurate. But the audience is not comparing it against the deck log. USS Fitzgerald's deck log for the period read 6:18 to 7:22, 14 KPAN surface contacts, Shershen and Chaho-class assessed, approach formation, range 4 nautical miles at closest. Course and speed change 0630, all ahead full, left 20 degrees. Formation repositioned 0641, turn northwest 07922. Full electronic collection throughout. No weapons employment, no damage, no personnel losses. Bank constraint cleared 630. The incident report was 8 pages and a 5-page intelligence annex. The Korean Central News Agency statement was 400 words and an image from an unrelated exercise. One of these documents contains a seeker characterization update that will be in the electronic countermeasures parameters of every U.S. and Allied surface combatant in the Western Pacific by the end of the week. The other one contains the word fled. The distinction between these two documents and what each one changes about the next time 14 KPAN boats depart Wonsan at 4:40 is the point. That is always the point. Bye for now.